What if every champion in the UFC retired from the sport of mixed martial arts tomorrow? How would the divisions continue, and what moves would Dana and his team make? Of course, the spirit of this video came to be after the recent retirement of Amanda Nunes, something that leaves both Bantamweight and Featherweight in a weird spot. But the question here is how the UFC would proceed with the next title fight, which fighters would get the call, and who, in my opinion, would rise up and claim the belt in the absence of the current champion. So let's get into it. Women's Strawweight. So what would happen if Zhang Weili decided enough was enough and just bounced? Well, for as much as she did royally mess up her last title fight, I'm still a Rose Namajunas believer, and I think as a two-time champion, she would probably put off her move to Flyweight to get that #1 spot by default. She beat Weili twice, she beat the GOAT Joanna twice, and while Yan Xiaonan has really shown herself to be a title threat, I do think you go with Weili's UFC 292 opponent Amanda Nunes. She's coming off back-to-back finishes, and though I would pick Rose to win on the scorecards and become a very rare three-time UFC champion, it would be an interesting matchup. Women's Flyweight. If Alexa Grasso called it a day on her fighting career, Valentina Shevchenko would be a clear frontrunner for a title shot. And while you could go with Manon Fiorot if she doesn't fight Namajunas next, or even Talia Santos, and it would make a lot of sense within the division, I do think the UFC would be better served to try something a little different and put Erin Blanchfield in there opposite the flyweight GOAT Shevchenko. Blanchfield is young, talented, aggressive, and highly skilled, and after finishing Jessica Andrade and Molly McCann back-to-back, I think this 24-year-old has the potential to be well known to the sports fanbase. And yes, although I think it's close, I think Blanchfield can beat Shevchenko. It's not a confident pick, but I'd back her to get the job done with a mid to late round stoppage. Women's Bantamweight. Say what you want about Juliana Peña's very dramatic reaction to Nunes' retirement. She knows what she's doing, and in my opinion, because of the lack of too many credible contenders within that top 5, Peña has already managed to single herself out as a sure pick for the vacant belt. Given that Raquel Pennington served as backup for the UFC 289 main event, and she is on a 5-fight win streak, I think you give her the title shot. Sure, it's not exactly the most Hollywood main event of all time, but Peña versus Pennington is a start, and I do think that Juliana would get the job done here to take home the belt for a second time. Women's Featherweight. So this is another one we're actually watching in real time. I don't think this division has a future. It really shouldn't as well. It never had rankings, and while they may or may not do a few more featherweight bouts just to see out a couple of contracts, I don't see any title fights in this division's future, unless a major star comes on the scene. Flyweight. Okay, so this one is a little awkward. Alexandra Pantoja just won the belt by beating a fighter in Brandon Moreno, who has been tied to title fights in this division constantly for the last few years, through that quadrilogy with Davison Figueiredo. And I don't think you can justify making fight number 5 here, even though they are ranked at number 1 and number 2. So I think you bring in either Amir Albazi, or set up a rematch between Brandon Moreno and Brandon Royval. Either way, I would back Moreno as the top-ranked guy to get the nod over Figueiredo, and I would also back him to beat either of these guys to retain his belt. Bantamweight. This one is pretty simple. Merab Dvalishvili has put himself in an odd deputy to the champion kind of position, as he no doubt waits for Aljamain Sterling to move up to featherweight, as he's talked about. And I do feel like that move is imminent. But if Aljo were to full-on retire tomorrow, well, first of all, I think Merab is definitely getting a title shot. And who would stand opposite him? Well, I think it would be the fighter who was next in line for Sterling anyway. Merab Dvalishvili versus Sean O'Malley. Number 1 versus number 2. And yeah, while O'Malley should not be counted out, I think this is a good matchup for Merab, and he puts on a very confident performance over 5 rounds to sap the fight out of O'Malley the more it goes on. I'll say he wins on the scorecards. Featherweight. If Alexander Volkanovski dropped the featherweight belt and just walked away, a certain Mr. Max Holloway would get one hell of an opportunity. Opposite him, despite the win we just saw from Ilia Topuria, I still think you gotta give it to Yair Rodriguez. Indeed, we just saw this fight not too long ago, but this is the bout that would lead the 145-pound division into its new era, and it would be fitting that the 2 highest ranked fighters in the division would be involved. And honestly, as much as it pains me, I think Yair beats Max in a rematch. That might sound crazy, but I just don't see Holloway continuing to grow and improve for too much longer. The dude has miles upon miles on his tank, and Yair is on the up in a big way. Not only would I back him to win, but I would back him to get a late stoppage as well. Lightweight. If Islam Makhachev bowed out of the game tomorrow, the UFC would have no shortage of options. Indeed, some of the top 5 are currently booked, with Gaethje and Poirier locked into the BMF fight, and it wouldn't be beyond the UFC to make the odd move of elevating that BMF fight to the undisputed title, but you do have to have Charles Oliveira Pereira in there. You could wait it out and basically have Charles rematch the winner of the BMF title fight for the actual belt towards the end of the year. In fact, that might be the best option. And I do think that Oliveira would beat either Gaethje or Poirier at the second time of asking to reclaim the belt and do the whole "the champion has a name" bit once more. On a quick side note, if you're enjoying this content, be sure to subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with all of our weekly uploads. We're also starting to push out exclusive content through our Patreon and YouTube membership program, so if you want to avail of that, check out the links in the description below. Welterweight. With Leon out of the picture, common sense might tell you that Colby is a 100% certainty in the UFC's eyes, and unless something goes wrong with the timing, I'd have to agree. And as far as I'm concerned, you gotta put Khamzat Chimaev opposite him. For as much as Khamzat's early run was amazing in the consistency of appearances and the hunger to compete, I just don't know what the hell he's been playing at over the last year, between the mess that was UFC 279 and his ongoing inactivity. Colby Covington is the exact same though. He doesn't fight often enough to merit this title shot. In fact, Colby hasn't beaten a single fighter in the current top 15, but it's a huge fight and I know Dana would love it. And yes, I do think that Khamzat would get his hand raised, taking home a win on the scorecards over Colby, and the belt as well, provided that he can make the weight. Middleweight. If Israel Adesanya stepped aside, would Alex Pereira continue as a middleweight? Well, I don't think so. The weight cut is obviously going to be tough for him, and the whole point of fighting Adesanya and Strickland was to avoid matchups like Whittaker. But Whittaker's own stock has taken a big hit in recent times, thanks to a stunning victory by Dricus du Plessis at UFC 290. And I think you gotta put DDP in there with Jared Cannonier. For as much as Whittaker has been great in recent years, he's not getting that title shot now. And while the bigger build-up would probably come from a Sean Strickland fight, Cannonier just beat the brakes off Marvin Vettori and definitely deserves it. As for the fight itself, I went through a period of being very high on Dricus, and then when his limitations became apparent, I fell off the bandwagon to some extent. Now, seeing what we just saw, it certainly does recontextualize him as a fighter. He's not the brute that we had painted him as, and there is a lot more to his overall game than meets the eye. I think he finishes Jared Cannonier to capture UFC gold. Light heavyweight. Well, some breaking news has come in. Jamal Hill has basically made something similar to this scenario a reality, becoming the fourth 205-pound champion in recent years to vacate the title without actually losing it. It does go without saying that Yuri Prochazka is getting this title shot. He is still the champion in most fans' eyes, and that's not to discredit Hill's improvements over the years or his performances of late, but Yuri's definitely in there, and I reckon you can put either Ankalaev or Blachowicz in there with him. In fact, the UFC could even go with Alex Pereira, but I would say that if they can do Jan Blachowicz, they will. Yuri is a very likable fighter, and a matchup with Jan Blachowicz would serve his chances of retaining his title better than a fight against Ankalaev in my opinion. Although I will pick Yuri over either fighter because I'm just done doubting him. Heavyweight. John Jones may be set to take on Stipe Miocic in a bout that could well serve as a retirement fight for both of them, but if he were to retire tomorrow, I do think that Stipe is still getting that shot. The UFC just booked Cyril Gane for a fight against Sergey Spivak, the number 8 guy in the world, and yeah, they do not want Cyril Gane near a title right now. He lost to both Jones and Ngannou and it just wouldn't sell. I think Pavlovich is an obvious pick, and yes, you could put Cyril Gane in there, but you could also do Tom Aspinall, and if Jones is truly gone, you could also bring back Stipe and set him up against Pavlovich. His career's work has earned him that right. So yeah, I think Pavlovich versus Miocic, and though I'm not 100% sold on Pavlovich just yet, I do think he would dust this version of Stipe pretty handily within the first 10 minutes. Anyway, that's the video. What did you think of our picks? And do you have any suggestions for similarly themed videos? I liked this one as soon as I came up with it, and we always want to keep the door open to fun suggestions within the same kind of vein. Anyways, if you enjoyed yourself, be sure to leave a like and a comment before subscribing to the channel so you don't miss a single upload. As always, thank you for watching.